There are places you go to feel free. Wide, open land, sky like a never-ending canvas, the hum of the roads stretching ahead like a promise. That's what I thought Texas would give me. Freedom. Solitude. Space to think. Maybe space to forget. But not everything that hides in the silence of the desert wants to be forgotten. Some things, they wait to be remembered. I'd been on the road for about 2 weeks by the time I crossed into West Texas, alone in my old Volkswagen Westphalia, a '79 pop top I rebuilt myself, piece by piece, with greasy hands and too many lonely nights in my garage back in Flagstaff. Her name was Lucy. She rattled when she hit 50 and leaked a little around the window seals, but she was mine. She was all I had left after the divorce, after the job, after everything. I wasn't chasing ghosts, not exactly, but I wasn't running from them either. I just needed somewhere quiet to park, cook a cheap meal, and maybe stare into a campfire long enough for my brain to quit spinning in circles. That's how I found it. A little off-grid RV camping site on the edge of the Davis Mountains, about an hour west of Fort Davis. It wasn't on any mainstream app, just a side mention in a dusty blog post from 2014 that hadn't had a comment in years. But it had shade, some fire rings, and best of all, no neighbors. No one for miles. Just me, the van, and the desert. The gravel road to get there was barely a road at all. Loose rock, potholes deep enough to break an axle, and mesquite branches clawing at the sides of Lucy like skeletal fingers. But I made it. Around 6 p.m., I pulled up under a twisted oak tree, the only real cover for a mile in any direction. The sun was already low, bleeding red and orange across the sky like something wounded. And there was that smell, hot dust, dry grass, and something else I couldn't quite place. Not sulfur, but close, like copper and rot. I told myself it was just old animal scat, probably wild pigs. I set up camp quickly. I knew the desert cooled fast after sunset, and I didn't want to be fumbling with anything in the dark. I had a small campfire going by 7, some beans heating on my propane burner, and a lukewarm beer cracked open beside me. I felt okay, maybe even good. The quiet was thick, not peaceful like a mountain forest, not gentle like a lakeside breeze. The desert quiet felt like being watched, like the air itself was holding its breath. That's when I saw the first one, a light, faint, about 200 yards out. No flicker, no movement, just a solid, soft glow like a candle behind a curtain. I stood up, squinting. My fire cracked behind me, the only sound in that heavy silence. I told myself it was a car, maybe another camper setting up late, but there was no engine noise, no headlights, and the light didn't move. It just stayed there, pulsing faintly like it was breathing. Then it went out. Just gone. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I told myself I was being dramatic, that it was just the desert playing tricks on me. Heat mirages, reflections, maybe even some kind of natural gas emission catching the last bit of sun. But I didn't eat the beans. I closed the van door, locked it, and sat in the driver's seat with the window cracked just enough to hear the wind. Except there wasn't any wind. No bugs, no crickets, no coyote calls. Nothing. Just the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. At around 10:40, I saw movement, not light this time. Shape. It was low to the ground, maybe waist height, moving from left to right at the edge of the tree line about 40 yards out. I flicked on the flashlight I kept near the dash and aimed it out the window, but there was nothing there. No tracks, no noise, no eye shine. I laughed, a nervous, dry sound. I told myself it was a javelina. They move in herds, maybe one had strayed. But I couldn't shake the way it moved, smooth, deliberate, like it was tracking something or someone. I didn't sleep, not that night. Instead, I kept the flashlight on my lap and my hand resting on the little hatchet I kept near the door. I felt stupid, paranoid, but also not alone. Around 1:15 a.m., the lights came back. This time, 3 of them, all in a line, equal spacing, no sound, no heat shimmer, just lights, floating about 5 feet off the ground. My breath hitched. I turned off the flashlight and leaned forward, pressing my forehead against the windshield. I thought maybe it was a drone. Ranchers use them sometimes, but these didn't move like drones. They didn't move at all until they did. They shifted, one to the left, one to the right. One stayed centered. It felt like watching eyes blink. I wanted to start Lucy. I wanted to slam my foot on the gas and just floor it down that awful gravel road until I hit asphalt again. But I didn't move. Something deeper than fear held me still. Like if I moved, I'd be seen. I don't know how long they stayed, 5 minutes, 10, but slowly, one by one, the lights dimmed. Not disappeared, dimmed. Like dying coals, like something retreating. And when they were gone, the silence came back. I slept in the driver's seat, one eye open, hands still on the hatchet. My body numb, my mind hollowed out by fear that didn't make sense. Fear I didn't know how to explain. By morning, everything looked normal. The sun was up, the campfire ashes were cold, the desert was still. I stepped out of the van, every muscle aching from the tension of the night, and checked around. No tracks, no signs of anything unnatural, not even a broken twig. But the smell was back. Stronger now. Not rot, not animal, like blood and electricity. Like something that had watched me, and now it was gone. But not really. And scrawled into the dust on the back of Lucy, just above the license plate, were 3 finger marks. Long, too long, and deep enough scratches in the paint beneath the dirt. I didn't scream when I saw those finger marks. I didn't even gasp. I just stood there, staring, my breath shallow and slow, like my lungs forgot how to move. The marks were too perfect. Not smudges, not swipes. 3 long, deliberate tracks drawn straight through the dirt caked on Lucy's rear hatch, dragging shallow scars into the old green paint. They looked fresh. But there hadn't been a single sound last night. Nothing touched the van. I would have heard it. I always heard everything. That's what happens when you're used to sleeping alone in strange places. You learn to wake at the sound of pine cones falling, at the shift in wind, at your own name whispered by memory in the dead of night. But this, I didn't hear this. And that's what scared me the most. I left the site without breakfast. No coffee, no fire, not even a piss break. I just grabbed the keys and drove. Tires skidding in gravel. Lucy protesting like an old horse being wrenched from her rest. I bounced hard down the path, branches scraping the paint as if they wanted me to bleed for trying to leave. Once I hit pavement, I didn't stop for hours. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed distance. Somewhere around Marfa, I finally pulled into a gas station with a busted ice machine and a hand-lettered sign on the door that read, "No mask, no entry," still taped up long after the pandemic faded into memory. I filled up, didn't speak to the clerk, just nodded when he asked, "You okay, friend?" and kept my sunglasses on even indoors. My hands were still shaking when I got back behind the wheel. It should have ended there. It didn't. That night, I parked at a state campground. Big Bend Ranch State Park. More official. More people. And yet, somehow, quieter. I picked a spot near the river, if you could call that sluggish brown line a river, and parked under the last sliver of daylight. There were other campers there, maybe 5 or 6 rigs spread across the gravel lots, and that should have made me feel better. Safer. But safety isn't something you feel when you're being hunted by something you don't understand. I cooked, ate, forced myself to act normal, made small talk with a couple in a Class C from Wisconsin who offered me a beer. I declined. My stomach was a knot. By 9 p.m., I was back in Lucy, doors locked, curtains drawn. I kept the flashlight close again, kept the hatchet closer. The desert was so dark. It swallows light. It doesn't reflect it. The kind of darkness that feels physical, like velvet pressing against your skin. A darkness you feel in your teeth. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Around 1:30 a.m., it happened again. Not lights this time, sound. 3 soft taps, not on the door, not on the window, from under the van. Tap, tap, deliberate. Slow, measured. I froze, sat up straight in the bed. My breath caught mid-inhale. I thought maybe something had fallen. A branch, a small animal. But the sound came again. Tap, pause, tap, pause, tap. right beneath where I slept. I slid out of the bed without making a sound and crouched near the sliding door, my ear inches from the metal floor. My heart was thudding so hard I thought it might drown out the noise. But no, I heard it again. Not tapping anymore. Scraping. Long, slow, deliberate, like fingernails on the underside of the van. I grabbed the hatchet, my flashlight, but I didn't open the door. I just sat there listening, trying to decide if I was going crazy, if my sleep-deprived brain was making this up. And then something whispered my name. It wasn't a voice from outside. It came from inside, Lucy, from the tiny storage compartment beneath the bench seat. I dropped the flashlight, not because I was scared, I was, but because my hand went numb, completely numb, like I just slammed it in a car door. My whole arm lit up in static. The whisper came again. Closer, like breath against the back of my neck. I turned. No one was there. Of course no one was there. But the curtains had all shifted, slightly open now, not all the way. Just enough to show me the pitch-black night outside. Just enough for someone or something to watch. I grabbed the keys, no shoes, no jacket, just grabbed them, started the van, and took off. Gravel kicked up behind me. The couple from Wisconsin stumbled out of their rig in pajamas as my headlights swept past, their faces pale with confusion. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I drove until the sun came up. When I finally pulled over near a roadside picnic area on Route 170, my knuckles were white and my lips were bleeding from where I'd bitten them raw. There were bruises on my arms, long ones, thin, like finger marks. But I'd been alone. No one had touched me, right? I sat in the open doorway of the van, watching the sun crawl over the messes, and I started to cry. Not loud, just soft, quiet tears that had nowhere else to go. I'd been through things before. Divorce, death, addiction. But I had never felt truly haunted until that moment. And the thing is, I don't think it was that campsite. I don't think it was the desert. I think it was following me. Whatever had scratched the van, whatever had whispered from the dark, it had come with me. Maybe it wasn't tied to a place. Maybe it was tied to me. Or maybe to Lucy. Because when I stood to stretch, I saw it again. On the back window. Not a handprint. A face. Fogged in condensation, like someone had pressed their forehead, nose, and lips against the glass from the inside. But I had slept alone. I always slept alone. I wiped the face from the glass. At first gently, like if I touched it too hard, it might become real, might breathe, move, smile. But it didn't smudge. It didn't fade. It resisted, like oil on water, like breath that clings even when the warmth is gone. I wiped harder, using the sleeve of my hoodie. Still, it left a vague outline, like it didn't want to leave, like it had imprinted itself there. I stepped back from the van, barefoot on the gravel shoulder of the road, the morning sun rising behind me like a mockery of comfort, warm light on my skin, cold dread in my bones. That's when I noticed something else. The shadow in the window wasn't mine. I was standing outside. The sun was behind me. But there it was, faint but definite. Another shadow stretched across the inside of Lucy's window, head tilted, the air watching me. My heart didn't race. It stopped. Just paused, like even it didn't want to be part of this. I climbed back inside, slow, cautious, as if I could pretend I hadn't seen what I just saw. I checked every compartment, every nook, every soft cushioned corner of that little van. There was no one, no thing. And yet, the air inside Lucy felt different now. Pressurized, tense, like stepping into a room where someone had just been crying. That invisible heaviness, that quiet, broken noise that doesn't come from sound, but from presence. I stayed in that pullout for hours, paralyzed by a truth I couldn't explain and didn't want to accept. It wasn't the kind of fear that makes you scream or run. It was slower, more patient, like being slowly buried under warm sand until you forget you need to breathe. Eventually I drove again, back roads, south, west, nowhere specific. I told myself I needed to keep moving, like motion would shake it loose, like maybe the ghost, or whatever it was, couldn't follow me if I didn't stop long enough for it to latch on. But no matter where I went, Lucy felt heavier. Not physically, emotionally, like something was riding with me, waiting, watching. That night, I camped at a tiny free site near Terlingua. Nothing more than a dirt loop and a trash barrel half full of scorched aluminum cans. No other campers, just me and the wind, and even that seemed hesitant to blow. I didn't cook, didn't light a fire. I just pulled the curtains, locked the doors, and sat in the dark, and still, that whisper. My name, softer now, familiar. Like it belonged to someone I loved a long time and had forgotten why I stopped. I curled into the bed, face buried in the blanket, fists clenched tight around the flashlight I didn't dare turn on. The silence was too complete. Light would have shattered it, would have invited whatever waited outside to come in. Then came the knock. Not tapping, not scratching, a knock. Firm, singular, right on the driver's side window. I didn't look, I couldn't, but I heard the door handle jiggle, once, twice, then stop. Then came the second knock, passenger side this time, and beneath it, breathing. Slow, deliberate, the kind of breath you only hear from someone standing too close. Still, I didn't move, didn't scream, didn't dare exist out loud. Then came the sound of the sliding door, not opening, just shifting, like the latch was being tested from the outside, like fingers were running over it, learning it, deciding. The van creaked ever so slightly like weight had shifted, then silence again, long, stretching, endless, until the engine started. On its own. Lights came on. Dashboard lit up. Lucy rumbled to life like I'd turned the key, but my hands hadn't moved. The keys were still clipped to the belt loop of my jeans. I leapt out of bed and lunged for the front seat, reaching for the ignition, but there was nothing there. No key in the slot, and the radio flicked on. Just static. Then a voice. Not mine. Not anyone I knew. Just one word. Stay. Then silence. The engine died, and every light in Lucy went out. Darkness again, but not the same as before. This darkness felt full, like it knew me now, like it had tried the front door, the back, and finally found a way through the cracks in my fear. I stayed awake all night, trembling in that tiny van I used to love, holding a flashlight I couldn't turn on, begging the dawn to come. But when morning did arrive, it didn't feel like rescue. It felt like a lie, because the sun rose and Lucy started like normal. The keys worked. The engine purred. The radio played Willie Nelson like nothing had ever happened. But when I checked the dash, the mileage was different, exactly 43 miles higher than it had been the night before. And there were tire tracks, just one pair, stretching out from my campsite and circling back. I hadn't driven anywhere, at least not while awake. But Lucy had moved. She had taken me somewhere, and I didn't remember a thing. I sat behind the wheel for an hour, staring at those tire tracks, my knuckles still white on the steering wheel. The coffee I tried to make sat untouched, lukewarm and bitter in the enamel mug near the gear shift. I couldn't make sense of it, couldn't untangle what was real from what my mind wanted to call a dream. But dreams don't drive you 43 miles through the desert in the middle of the night. Dreams don't leave dust on your boots that you didn't walk through. I opened the glove compartment and stared at the paper map I always kept folded in there, even though I had GPS. I never trusted satellites when I was this far from civilization. I traced my finger along the faded routes near Terlingua through the badlands near the river, and my eye caught something. A name I didn't recognize, a small black dot labeled simply Campo Santo. No road led to it. No markers nearby, just a label, a scar on the paper. I'd never heard of it before, but something in my gut clenched tight. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. I didn't choose to drive toward it. I didn't plan it. But when I put Lucy in gear, that's where the road took me. The desert got quieter the closer I got. Not just the usual hush of sand and wind, but a stillness that felt unnatural. No birds, no bugs, not even the creak of wind through dry scrub. It was like the land itself had gone into mourning. When I finally stopped, it was because Lucy sputtered and died. No warning, no dashboard lights, just silence. I opened the door and stepped out. Sand crunched under my boots like dry snow. The air smelled wrong. Not foul, not rotten, but thick, like copper, like something metallic sweating in the sun. Campo Santo wasn't a town. It was a graveyard, a forgotten one, old. Eroded wooden crosses leaned like broken teeth. Stone markers cracked by time and sun. Some graves had no names. Others were marked with names I couldn't read, the letters eroded down to faint shadows in the stone. And in the center, a large oak tree stood, twisted and blackened, its bark charred as if struck by lightning, once or many times. At its base sat a small, rusted Volkswagen Beetle. Not a van, a Beetle. Paint stripped, tires rotted, windshield shattered. But in the dust on the driver's side glass, just above the door handle, 3 long finger marks, just like Lucy. I stepped closer. My throat went dry. My chest tightened, because carved into the trunk of that old oak just above where the Beetle rested was a single word: stay. The same voice from the radio, the same word. And suddenly I remembered something. Not a memory, exactly, more like a shadow in my mind. A flicker. I'd been here before. Years ago. Maybe as a child, maybe in another life, but I knew that tree. I knew that car. I remembered riding in it. Wind in my hair, music on the radio, my father's voice humming a tune I couldn't name. And I remembered screaming. Not out of fear, out of grief. I turned to leave to run back to Lucy, but the landscape had changed. There were no more tire tracks, no more road, just desert, endless and still, and the van, my Lucy, was gone. Only the Beetle remained. And inside it, through the broken windshield, I could see my own reflection, but not me now. Me younger, me afraid, me trapped. I don't remember falling, but I hit the sand hard, and when I looked up, the tree had changed. Its bark moved the wind. There was no wind. It pulsed like veins beneath skin, and from its branches hung ribbons, old, tattered, sun-bleached, dozens of them, and tied to each one was a name, not carved, written on scraps of faded cloth, paper, even old receipts. And one of them read David, my brother's name. He died when I was 9, drowned. We were camping in Texas, in the van. And that was the last trip we ever took as a family. I never remembered where. Not until now. I stood up, my legs felt weak, my eyes burned, not from the sun, but from the weight of memory flooding back like a broken dam. This place, it wasn't just a graveyard. It was ours. It was where my brother died. It was where I forgot. And something had brought me back. Something inside Lucy, something in the desert, not a ghost, not a demon, something older, a memory that didn't want to stay buried. I turned to run, but the sand held me like hands. And then I heard the engine, not Lucy's, the Beetle. It started, slow, coughing, like a dying thing given breath. And I saw someone in the driver's seat, not me, not now. My father, except his eyes were hollow, his face pale, his hands gripping the wheel like it was all he had left. And in the passenger seat, my brother, eyes closed, lips blue, motionless, and in the back, a shadow, not a person, not a shape, just a void. Watching me. The Beetle didn't drive away. It disappeared, just faded, like fog in sunlight, and the cemetery returned, silent, empty. The tree still, the ribbon still, only the mark remained on the trunk. Stay. But I wouldn't. I dug into my pocket for the van key out of habit, even though Lucy was gone, and it was there, warm, buzzing, humming almost. I closed my eyes and turned it in my hand, and when I opened them, Lucy was back, parked just 10 feet away, unmoved, but different, darker, older, like time had passed for her, but not for me, and on her windshield, one word traced in fog: go. I didn't hesitate. I climbed back into Lucy, that same worn step under my boot, the soft creak of the pop-top hinges as I brushed past the door frame. Everything looked the same. The mugs still rattled in their holder. The bed was unmade. My jacket hung from the closet door. But the air was wrong. Thicker. Heavier. And it hummed. Like the interior had absorbed the frequency of something unnatural, something old and intelligent, and now it vibrated quietly beneath the seams and bolts and fabric, waiting to speak again. I turned the key. Lucy started instantly. No sputter, no hesitation, and the radio crackled to life, like it had been waiting, tuned to a station I didn't recognize. A voice whispered between bursts of static, gentle and cold and unmistakably female. You were supposed to stay. I slammed the radio off. My fingers trembled against the dial. My whole body was shaking, jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. I didn't look back at Campo Santo. I didn't want to see if the beetle was still there. I pressed the clutch, shifted into first, and drove. I didn't know where I was heading, only that it needed to be away. Away from the tree. Away from the memory. Away from the thing that had burrowed into the backseat of my mind. But as the tires gripped the dusty earth and the landscape bled back into the open desert, I felt it again. The presence. Behind me. Not inside Lucy. Inside me. Every mile I drove felt like an unraveling. Every fence post and brittle shrub I passed looked vaguely familiar, like deja vu had glued itself to the edge of my vision. I started to feel like I wasn't escaping anymore. I was looping, circling, driving in the shape of a memory I couldn't forget. By noon, I hit the highway. I saw other cars, people, but they didn't feel real, like shadows painted on a backdrop, like a set. And I started to doubt myself. Maybe I never left that place. Maybe I was still there, in that pit of silence beneath the old black tree, and all this movement, all this road, it was just my mind trying to claw its way out of a truth too awful to swallow. I pulled into a rest stop just north of Alpine, middle of nowhere, just a few picnic tables, a pair of broken vending machines, and a bathroom that smelled like bleach and old rain. I splashed water on my face at the sink, looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked wrong, too wide, too dark, like something else was looking through me, like I was becoming the reflection. The faucet behind me squealed and shut itself off. I hadn't touched it. The air grew cold, not the chill of nightfall, the cold of a place you're not supposed to be. The stall doors behind me creaked open, one by one, bang, 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 no footsteps, just movement, then silence, until a soft whisper echoed off the tile, not from a person, from the mirror. It mouthed the words I hadn't said aloud since I was a child. You left him. And suddenly I saw it. The flash of water, the scream, the stillness, the silence. My brother's face, David, blue-lipped, reaching, and me, frozen, because I was afraid, because I thought something was under the water. Not him. Something else. Something older than drowning. I staggered back, knocking the soap dispenser off the wall. I didn't stop to explain. Didn't say a word to the elderly man walking his dog outside. I jumped back into Lucy, turned the key, and this time the engine didn't start. The lights flickered. The horn blared once, long and hollow, and then nothing. I pounded the wheel, screamed. I'm sorry. I didn't even know if I meant it, but it was all I had. And then the key turned on its own. The engine roared to life, and the radio played a lullaby, one I hadn't heard since I was 5. The one my mother used to sing in the back of the van when the nights were cold and the wind howled through desert passes. It played on loop, soft, haunting, unbearably warm, like the arms of someone already gone. I drove again, but this time it felt different, like Lucy wasn't moving across land, but through time, backwards, inward, toward the thing I had tried to bury under layers of desert dust and silence. Night came early, too early. The sun blinked out like a blown fuse, and the world darkened so fast I thought I had passed into a tunnel. But there were no tunnels here, just open country. So why couldn't I see the stars? I pulled off at a bend in the road, killed the engine, stepped outside. The sky wasn't black, it was red. Not fire red, not blood red. A dull, throbbing red like something behind it was alive and angry. And the stars, they weren't where they were supposed to be. They weren't stars at all. Just holes, tiny pinpricks of nothing. Something moved along the horizon, low, crawling, slow, like a figure dragging itself across sand. I backed toward the van, fumbled the door, got in, locked it, turned the key, but Lucy wouldn't start. The radio buzzed, then clicked, and the voice returned. You can't leave until you remember. I screamed, not out of fear, out of anger, because I had remembered, because I had tried, because I had buried it for a reason. But the voice wasn't angry, it was sad, and it whispered one last time, he never left you. Then silence. Total. No wind, no engine, no breath, just the sound of something unlatching, the back hatch. The hatch creaked open behind me, slow, gentle, like a breath being held, then exhaled. I didn't turn. I couldn't. Because I already knew what I'd see. Not a monster, not a shadow. David. Not the boy I remembered from photo albums and vague memories in sunlit kitchens. Not the laughing little brother who used to stick gummy bears in the cassette deck and tell me secrets under tent blankets in the back of Lucy. This David was wet. His clothes clung to him, heavy with water that didn't drip, his skin pale, waxy, his eyes open, but not accusatory, just sad, like he didn't blame me, like he never did. I stayed frozen in the driver's seat, staring forward, hands gripping the wheel like it could anchor me to something real. But his presence filled the cabin like smoke, heavy, clinging, familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. I felt the seat behind me shift under weight that shouldn't exist. He was sitting there now, right where he used to sit on long road trips, swinging his legs, kicking the seat every time we hit a bump. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror, but I heard him speak. 3 words. Quiet. Steady. Not a whisper, a memory. You saw it. And suddenly it was back. The lake, the way the sky had gone too still, the ripples moving wrong, not in circles, spirals, the shape beneath the water, long and twisting like it didn't belong in the world we knew. David had gone too close, and I had watched, because I was afraid, not afraid for him, afraid of what I saw in the water, afraid it would take me too, and so I froze, and when he screamed, I ran. Back to the van, locked the doors, waited for someone else to save him, but they didn't. No one did. And in the years after, I let my mind reshape the truth, turned it into an accident, a slip, a tragic misstep. But it wasn't. It was me. It was my fear. And now he was here, not to punish me, not even to forgive me, just to be seen, to make sure I knew the truth. So I sat there in that unmoving van on the edge of nowhere under a red sky full of wrong stars, and I finally looked, not into the mirror, into the back seat, and he was there, still wet, still cold, but smiling, not with teeth, not with joy, just with peace. And he nodded, like that was all he needed. And then he was gone. No noise, no van door creak, no puff of smoke, just gone. And the engine started on its own, like it always had when something needed me to listen. I drove, not fast, not far, just until the sky turned black again, not red, not broken, just night, honest night. And I pulled off on the side of a quiet highway in West Texas. No signs, no lights, just desert. And I slept, for the first time in days, not because I was safe, but because I was done running. In the morning, Lucy was cool to the touch. No messages on the windshield, no strange handprints, just dust and sun and wind that finally sounded like wind. I looked around. No towns nearby, no people, but the silence didn't feel hollow anymore. It felt earned. I made coffee, watched the sunrise, and I remembered everything, not just the fear, not just the water, but David, his laugh, his stupid jokes, the way he would sleep curled up with his head on my shoulder on long drives, even when I pretended to hate it. I pulled out the old map from the glove box, found Camposanto again, circled it in red, not to go back, but to never forget, to remind myself that sometimes the scariest places aren't haunted by monsters. They're haunted by memory, by truth, by the parts of ourselves we locked in the dark hoping the road would outrun them. But it never does. The road doesn't cleanse you. It reveals you. It holds up the mirror. And if you're lucky, if you're really, truly lucky, you get a second chance to look. I started Lucy. She purred like always. The morning breeze blew in through the cracked window, and I whispered into it, I remember, David. I remember now. No reply, no sign, just the road and the quiet. And finally, peace. There are moments that never leave you, even when the fog of memory tries to soften their edges. For me, it started with a silence too thick, too perfect, like the mountains themselves were holding their breath. And that night, tucked into a quiet stretch of the Great Smoky Mountains, inside my old Volkswagen Westphalia, I felt something watching. Not from the trees, not from the shadows, from the stillness itself. I had been on the road for nearly 3 weeks by then. Late autumn had settled into Tennessee like a slow exhale. Trees half naked, their leaves rustling in brittle whispers. The air soaked in the scent of damp earth and moss. The park was mostly deserted, which was exactly how I liked it. I wasn't running from anything. At least, that's what I told myself when I left Chicago behind and pointed the van south. I told people I just wanted quiet, space, a little clarity. But clarity has a way of forcing things into view that we've worked hard to blur. The campground I pulled into wasn't anything fancy, just a pull-off spot on a winding road, Elkmont, if I remember right, the kind of place you only find when you're not looking. The ranger station had long since closed for the season. I didn't see another car on the road for miles. That suited me just fine. I parked beneath a canopy of skeletal branches, killed the engine, and let the quiet fold itself around me. I remember thinking how beautiful it was, the kind of eerie, untouched beauty that makes you whisper without knowing why. The wind threaded through the trees like it was searching for something, and every once in a while, a gust would push against the van, rocking it just enough to remind me how small I was. I cooked dinner over a little propane stove, just beans and rice, nothing fancy. No campfire. The rangers had warned of dry conditions, plus I didn't want to draw attention, not from people, not from anything else. After I ate, I sat outside on a folding chair, sipping a beer and listening to the forest breathe. That's when I noticed it. The first thing, it wasn't a sound exactly, more like the absence of one. The chirping stopped. The owls, which had been calling back and forth somewhere deeper in the woods, fell silent. The wind even seemed to still, like a needle lifting off a record. My breath fogged in the cold air. I leaned forward, staring into the dark, listening for something I couldn't name. A predator, maybe? A bear? I reached for the flashlight and swept it across the woods. Nothing, just trees, tangled underbrush, and silence so thick it felt like it was pressing against my chest. I told myself to get inside, lock the doors, go to bed. But I didn't. I stayed there, staring, straining, my fingers tightening around the flashlight until the plastic creaked. Then came the knock. 3 of them. Soft, deliberate, but not on the door. They came from underneath the van. At first, I didn't react. I didn't understand. It was too absurd. A branch, an animal. Maybe the wind had tossed something against the chassis, but then came another. Knock, knock, knock. Same rhythm, same gentle insistence. I dropped the flashlight. It clattered against the gravel, beam flickering wildly as it rolled into the brush. I backed away, eyes locked on the van, heart slamming so hard I could hear it in my ears. I wanted to speak, shout, something, anything, but my throat had clamped shut. That was when I realized I was holding my breath. I forced myself to move, to circle wide around the van, keeping my back to the woods. The flashlight was useless now, its beam pointing at nothing. My hand shook as I reached for the driver's door. I yanked it open and climbed inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it with a trembling thumb. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring out through the windshield, barely blinking. Nothing moved. The forest had returned to silence, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there, was still there. Not just near the van, underneath it. I pulled my feet up onto the seat, just in case. That's when I heard it again. But this time, it wasn't a knock, it was a whisper. Not a voice, not in English, just sound, low, rasping, like wind through a dying throat. It came from behind me, not outside, inside the van. I turned so fast my neck cracked. Nothing, just the dark, cramped interior. My bed, the sink, the cabinets, the little dream catcher I'd pinned in New Mexico swaying ever so slightly from its hook above the back window. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the driver's seat, knees drawn up, holding a tire iron like it was a sword, staring into the darkness, breath shallow and ragged. I didn't move. I barely blinked, because every time I looked away, even for a second, I could feel something shifting in the shadows. By the time dawn broke, I had convinced myself it was all in my head. Exhaustion. Stress. Maybe even some weird acoustic trick of the woods. The forest plays with sound like a child plays with shadows, stretching it, bending it, hiding it in places you can't reach. But when I finally stepped outside, blinking against the pale morning light, I found something that tore through every rational excuse I had built like a house of cards in the night. Beneath the van, Right beneath where I had been sitting was a pile of rocks, stacked carefully, deliberately, balanced in a perfect little tower no more than 6 inches high. I didn't sleep again for days, and I didn't tell anyone. Not really. Not at first. Because how do you explain something like that? A sound, a knock, a whisper, a tower of rocks. Out here, where things move in silence, where people go missing and the forest never gives them back, how do you speak that truth without sounding like you've lost your mind? But that was just the beginning. The Smokies had more to show me, and not all of it waited until dark. I left the rocks there. I didn't touch them. I didn't even breathe near them. Just stared at that fragile little tower like it might collapse if I blinked the wrong way. There was something about how clean it looked, how purposefully it had been placed. Not a tumble of debris, not some natural accident. This was intention, precision. And whoever or whatever had done it had come closer to me in the night than I was willing to admit. I packed up in silence, rolled up the folding chair, stuffed the sleeping bag back into its sack with trembling fingers. The van door closed with a hollow clunk, louder than it should have been in the morning stillness. My breath fogged up the windshield as I started the engine. The sound of the ignition gave me something to focus on, something mechanical, explainable. But the forest didn't move, didn't breathe. It only watched. I didn't drive far, just to the next pull-off down the mountain. I needed to regroup, clear my head. There's a stretch of road along Newfound Gap that most people use just to snap a photo, stretch their legs. That morning, it felt like a lifeline. Tourists hadn't arrived yet, just the hum of wind and the slow shuffle of clouds overhead. I parked facing the overlook, got out, and for the first time in what felt like years, I let the sun hit my face. I wanted to believe it was over, that whatever I'd experienced the night before was some strange one-off. Maybe a prank, maybe a hallucination. But then I opened the back of the van to grab my thermos, and my breath caught in my throat. The dream catcher, the one hanging from the back window, it was gone. Not fallen, not broken. Gone. I hadn't touched it. No wind could have reached it from inside the van. But the leather string was still there, hanging from the hook like something had untied it, not torn, unraveled. I stared at that empty thread for a long time. Too long. Long enough that I didn't notice the car pull in behind me. Not until the voice called out from a few feet away. "You all right?" I turned, blinking into the sun, and saw a man standing just behind the passenger side of my van. Mid-50s maybe, worn flannel shirt, ball cap pulled low over his eyes. He had the look of someone who knew the woods better than most people knew themselves. "Yeah," I said automatically. "Yeah, I'm fine." He squinted at me. "You sure? You look like you saw a ghost." I wanted to laugh. Instead, I nodded. "Just a weird night." He walked closer, slowly. Not threatening, but deliberate. His eyes flicked toward the van, then back to me. "You camping up near Elkmont?" "Yeah." He sucked in a breath through his teeth and looked away for a second. "Shouldn't stay up there alone." I didn't answer. He let the silence stretch between us, and then he said very softly, "You hear it?" My stomach turned to ice. "Hear what?" He didn't speak for a moment, just stared out over the overlook like he was weighing something inside himself. "There's stories," he said eventually. "Older than this park, older than the country, about things that move through the trees up there, things that knock, things that whisper, things that don't like being seen." I tried to keep my voice steady. "You think it's just a story?" He shrugged. "Don't matter what I think, but I don't camp up there. Not anymore." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized his hands were shaking. Just a little. Not from the cold. From memory. We didn't say much after that. He got in his truck and drove off without another word. I stood there, clutching the thermos like it could protect me, and stared at the spot where he'd parked, wondering what he hadn't told me. I should have left then, driven out of the park and never looked back, but something held me there. Not pride, not curiosity, guilt. Because there was a part of me, some fragile, frightened part, that had felt that whisper. Not just heard it, felt it. like it knew something about me I didn't want to face, and walking away felt like leaving that question unanswered. So I stayed. Just one more night, I told myself. Not in the same spot, somewhere new, somewhere lower. I found a small, out-of-the-way site near a stream, off a gravel road that hadn't seen maintenance in years. I had to crawl the van over ruts so deep the tires scraped bottom. No one else was there. No signs. No fire rings. Just flat ground and a patch of dying light. I set up quickly, skipped dinner, left the back hatch open so I could hear the stream as it ran over the rocks. It was calming, grounding. The sound of movement felt better than the silence I'd left behind. For a few hours it worked. I read by lantern light, wrote a little in my notebook, tried to forget the dream catcher, the rocks, the whisper. And then just after midnight, the stream stopped. Not slowed, not quieted. Stopped. It was like someone had turned off a faucet. I froze, pen halfway across a sentence. The van was deathly still. No crickets, no breeze, just the sound of my own breath. I climbed out and walked to the stream bed with the lantern. The water had vanished. Completely. Not even a trickle. The rocks were dry. My heart pounded against my ribs as I moved the lantern back and forth, trying to understand what I was seeing. The bed didn't look disturbed. No dam, no clog, just emptiness. And then I saw the footprints. Bare. Human. Dozens of them. Moving upstream. Some small, some large. Some so faint they looked half-formed, like something had only pretended to be human. I backed away slowly. My throat had gone dry, my mouth filling with the taste of iron and ash. That's when I heard it again, the whisper. This time it came from behind me. Not in the woods, not in the van. Right behind me. I turned so fast I dropped the lantern. It struck a rock with a dull clunk, the glass cracking just enough to send the light flickering. Shadows lunged across the stream bed like they'd been waitings, crawling up trees and twisting across the ground like fingers reaching. But there was no one there. No animal. No person. Just the footprints and me, standing in the middle of a stream bed that had dried up without warning. My breath came shallow and fast. I turned in a full circle, scanning the tree line. Every branch looked wrong, like it was leaning just slightly toward me, like the forest had tilted. The whisper didn't come again. It didn't need to. I could feel it now. Inside me, like it had crawled in through my ears and was burrowing down into my spine. I staggered back to the van, nearly tripping over the ruts in the gravel. My hands shook so hard I fumbled the keys twice before I got the lock open. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it. Every single one. I even pulled the curtain across the windshield. I told myself I'd drive out, that I'd leave right then. But my hands wouldn't start the engine. They just hovered there on the wheel, trembling, useless, because something had shifted. Not just in the forest, in me. The quiet had teeth now. I could feel it watching, not from outside, from underneath. And then I heard it again. That slow, deliberate knock, knock, knock from beneath the van. I screamed. I didn't mean to. It just tore out of me like it had been waiting too. I grabbed the tire iron again and braced myself, half expecting something to come crashing through the floor. But nothing did. The knocks didn't come again. What did come was the scratching, not loud, not panicked, rhythmic, a dragging sound like nails across metal. I sat frozen, gripping the tire iron so tight my knuckles turned white. I counted my breaths, counted the seconds. I don't know how long it lasted. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. Eventually, silence. No more scratches, no knocks. Just that awful, pressurized stillness. I waited until sunrise. When I finally climbed out of the van, the world looked normal again. Birds chirped, the wind moved, the stream was back, flowing like nothing had ever stopped it. I checked underneath the van. Nothing. No footprints, no marks, no sign that anything or anyone had been there. I almost convinced myself to believe it had been a dream, until I noticed the back of the van, near the hatch, scratched into the paint, deep, ragged, undeniable, were 3 letters, D-O-N. That's it. Not a full name, not a word, just done. I stared at those letters like they might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. But they never did. And deep down, I knew they weren't for me. I wasn't the first person that thing had watched, maybe not even the first this week. I left that morning, didn't eat, didn't speak. Just drove hour after hour until the trees thinned and the weight of them lifted off my chest. I made it to a little town called Townsend and parked in the lot of a gas station. I just sat there for a while. Eventually, a man walked out of the store and noticed me, asked if I was all right. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to smile and lie and pretend I hadn't spent the last 2 nights unraveling. But instead, I asked him, "You ever hear anything about the Smokies?" He blinked. "What kind of things?" "Knocks, whispers, people going missing, strange footprints." He went quiet. Then he said, "You see the stack?" That made my blood go cold. He saw the look on my face and nodded. "Yeah," he said. "You saw it." I asked him how he knew, asked him if it had happened to him. He didn't answer, just said one thing before walking away: "They don't like to be remembered." They don't like to be remembered. I didn't sleep for 3 days after that. I drove out of Tennessee, headed west, past Nashville, past Memphis. I didn't even stop until I crossed into Arkansas. But the whole time, I felt like something had followed me, not in the mirrors, not in the road behind me, inside the van. A sense of pressure, of waiting, a memory that didn't belong to me. I tried to tell myself it was over, but some stories don't end. They just wait. And the worst part, weeks later, when I finally dared to check the back of the van again, those 3 letters had changed. Done was now don't. I didn't touch the new scratches, just stared at them like they were burning through the paint. The T was fresh, sharper, cleaner. You could tell it had been added later. I ran my hand near the metal, stopped just before contact. My fingertips tingled like there was static dancing in the air between my skin and the van. I thought maybe I was imagining it, but I could smell something faint, charred wood, old rust, a scent that didn't belong in that Arkansas parking lot. Don't. That was all it said now. Nothing else, no explanation, no context, just a command. One word, like a whispered threat from the forest that hadn't stopped speaking, even though I'd left the trees behind. I didn't sleep that night either. Not really. I lay in the back of the van with every curtain drawn, every door locked twice, the tire iron resting across my chest like a blanket, my ears strained against the silence, trying to make sense of every little creak and pop the van made. And every time the wind moved or a truck passed on the road nearby, I flinched, waiting for the knock, waiting for the whisper. But it didn't come. Not that night. The next morning, I drove to a car wash. I tried to scrub the word off the back of the van, used the pressure hose, soap my own fingernails, but it wouldn't fade. The paint around it flaked, peeled, but the letters stayed, as if they weren't scratched in, but grown into the metal. I told myself I'd have it repainted, covered. I didn't want to be the person with "don't" etched into their back window like a warning label from hell. But then came the dreams. They started simple. I'd wake in the middle of the night, sweating, heart racing, convinced someone had been watching me through the van windows. Sometimes I thought I saw movement just outside, a shape that slipped away the second my eyes opened. Other nights, it was a voice calling my name in a tone too flat, too calculated to be human. But eventually, they changed, became more vivid. I saw the forest again, but different this time. The trees were taller. Wrong. They bent inward, growing toward each other until the canopy sealed shut and the sky disappeared completely. There was no ground in those dreams, just a thick carpet of ash that clung to my shoes and left black prints wherever I stepped. And always, always there were the rocks, little stacks, balanced, watching. I started finding them in real life too, at gas stations, campsites. One morning in Oklahoma, I parked near a rest area, went inside to brush my teeth, and when I came back, there was a stack of 4 stones on my driver's seat. That was the day I stopped pretending. I found a motel that night, slept in a real bed, first time in weeks, locked the door, pushed a chair under the handle, closed the blinds so tight not even the sunrise could push through. And yet I still heard the whisper. This time, though, it didn't come from outside or behind me. It came from inside my own mouth. I woke up choking, not gasping, choking. My mouth was open, my jaw locked, and I could feel the whisper clawing up from my throat like smoke. I couldn't speak, couldn't scream. Just sat there in bed, convulsing, the sound of my own breathing replaced by something else. It lasted less than a minute, but when it was over, I felt hollow, like something had used me, borrowed me for a moment. I left that motel before the sun was up, didn't even grab the receipt. And that was when I made the mistake. I called someone. I told myself I just needed to talk, hear another voice, something normal. I called my sister, the only person who really knew what it meant when I said I was tired, not from driving, but from running. She picked up after 3 rings, sounded groggy, but kind. "Where are you?" she asked. "Somewhere near the border," I said. "Arkansas, I think." "You sound weird. I feel weird." There was a pause. Then she said, "Are you going to come home soon?" And that word, home, hit something inside me that I hadn't let rise in weeks. It cracked a part of me that I'd buried under layers of asphalt and denial and ghost stories. And I think that's why I told her. Not everything, but just enough. The knocking, the whisper, the rocks, the dreams, and finally, the scratches. There was a long silence on the other end. Then she said something I didn't expect. "You know that name?" "Don?" I froze. My blood turned to ice. "Yeah," I said. "What about it?" Another pause. "Uncle Don." "What?" "Uncle Don, from Dad's side. You don't remember him?" "No," I said. I never met him, right?" "No," she said. "You were too young. He went missing." "When?" She was quiet. I could hear her breathing. "In the Smokies, long time ago. I don't know all the details. Dad never talked about it. I only remember because I overheard Mom once. She said that the family used to camp out there when they were kids. Don was like 16, went out one night with a flashlight, never came back." Something inside me folded in on itself, like a door had opened, but the room behind it was wrong. "Why didn't anyone ever tell me?" "I don't know," she said. "I guess because it was so long ago. You were a baby." I didn't know what to say, because suddenly that word carved into the van wasn't a warning. It was a name, and now it had changed. I got off the phone and ran to the back of the van, and there in the metal, just below the word "don't," a new letter had been etched. An E. Just one. Not "don't," not a command anymore. Now it was a name. Don't-T. D. And I swear to God, as I stood there staring at it, I heard the whisper again. Not in my ears this time. In my blood. It's hard to explain what that feels like, when a sound is no longer something you hear, but something that moves inside you. Like static in your veins, like pressure behind your eyes. I stood at the back of the van, the sun just starting to rise behind me, and I felt it coiling deeper into my chest with every breath. Dante. I had never heard the name before, not spoken, not read, not in dreams or memories or family stories, but now it was carved into my van like it had always been there, like it had been waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to remember. But the remembering wasn't mine. That was the worst part. It felt like someone else's memories were pushing into me, slow at first, like fog creeping through a crack in the door. I'd look at trees and feel recognition, smell burning leaves and feel grief. At night, I'd fall asleep and dream of old maps, worn boots, headlights cutting through mountain mist. But none of it belonged to me. It belonged to him who was. Whatever was left of him. I kept driving. I told myself I could outrun it, that if I just got far enough west, into open skies and dry deserts, maybe the thing would dissolve, leave me hollow again, but safe. That's what I wanted. The emptiness back. It had felt like loneliness before. Now it felt like safety. But the van had other ideas. It started small. The lights flickered. The engine stuttered just once on a wide stretch of I-40. The heater gave out even though the air was cold enough to fog the windows. And every time I stopped for gas, I felt eyes on me. Not from people, from behind me, like the whisper had learned how to watch. Then came the directions. I don't mean I heard voices telling me where to go. I mean the GPS started changing routes on its own. Subtle at first. A left turn instead of a right. A scenic byway instead of the highway. Places I never entered but somehow ended up in. Winding roads, remote pull-offs, long stretches without service, and always, always toward the east, toward the mountains. I fought it for days, slept in parking lots, ate in diners with too many lights, left the van locked and walked for miles just to feel like I had control again. But every night I'd come back and find a new rock stack. Not near the van anymore. Inside it, on the stove, balanced on the dash. One morning I woke up with one on my chest. That broke something in me. I knew I had to go back. I didn't have a plan, didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew that whatever this was, whatever had wormed its way into me, turned my van into a message board and my body into a tuning fork, it had started in the Smokies. And it wasn't going to stop until I stood on the ground where it first touched me. So I drove back, through Tennessee, past Chattanooga, past Knoxville, into the folds of the mountain range that had made me feel like I was drowning in silence. The moment I crossed into the park again, the engine purred. The heater clicked back on. The radio, which had been a static mess for weeks, began to play a song. John Denver, Take Me Home, Country Roads. I didn't though, because as that song filled the van, I felt the whisper again. Not loud, not cruel, but pleased. It had brought me home. I didn't go back to Elkmont. I took a different road, one I didn't remember, but the van seemed to know. A dirt track, barely wide enough for the tires, winding deeper than I thought the park ever went. No signs, no markers, just trees that pressed closer the further I drove. And then I saw it, the clearing. A wide, unnatural circle in the forest, where the trees stopped and the grass grew too thick. Moss hung from limbs like wet rope. In the middle of the clearing, a single stone chimney stood, blackened by time, crumbled halfway down one side, like it had once belonged to a cabin, long gone now. Swallowed. I stopped the van, stepped out. It felt like stepping into a memory I'd never had. The air buzzed, not with sound, with weight, like the place remembered me, even if I didn't remember it. I walked toward the chimney, and there, carved into the stone near the base, were more letters, not scratched this time, burned. Dawn, 1986. My legs buckled. 1986, the year I was born. No one in my family had ever said a word about this place. Not once. And yet it stood here, silent and waiting, like a wound in the world that hadn't scabbed over, like it had been bleeding quietly for decades. I dropped to my knees, and the whisper came. This time it spoke. And I understood it. Not in words, in emotion. He didn't mean to leave. That's what it said. He didn't know how to come back. I could see it then, not with my eyes, but with something deeper. A memory pulled from the marrow of my bones. A young man, 16, flashlight in hand, lost, cold, trying to find his way home, but he never did, because the forest keeps things. If it whispers to you and you listen, truly listen, it doesn't let go. I stayed in that clearing for hours, didn't cry, didn't scream, just listened. And for the first time, I understood. It wasn't haunting me. It was asking me to remember him. I didn't move for a long time. The light shifted around me, casting long shadows from the ruined chimney like the past was reaching across the grass to touch me again. The breeze through the branches no longer whispered threats. It hummed something else. Sadness. Or maybe regret. Like the forest wasn't proud of what it had done, only certain it had to be done. The whisper had grown quiet, but it hadn't left. I could feel it pacing just beneath the surface of my skin. Not angry, not possessive, just watching, waiting. I think it wanted to know what I would do now that I finally understood. I stood. My knees ached, my hands trembled, but I walked the edge of that chimney like I was circling a grave. I guess I was. There was no headstone, no cross, no flowers. Just that name and that year burned black into the stone. Dante 1986, the year I was born. It didn't make sense at first, not in the way I needed it to. The math was wrong. The age didn't line up, and yet, there it was. Carved not just into stone, but into me, like his name had always been waiting under my skin. Maybe that's what the forest had been whispering all along. Not warnings, not threats, but fragments of memory, of identity, of blood. I stepped back toward the van and stopped. There was someone sitting in the driver's seat. Not a reflection, not a trick of light. Someone was in my van. For a long time, I didn't move. Just watched through the trees, heart hammering, mouth dry. The figure didn't look up, didn't move, just sat there, hands on the wheel like it had always belonged there. Slowly, I stepped forward. My feet barely touched the ground. The forest had gone silent again, but it no longer scared me. It felt like it was holding its breath for me. As I approached, I could see more. The man, boy, really, looked young, 16, maybe 17, dressed in an old windbreaker, hair messy, face lean, like a picture from an old family album. His head turned, just slightly, toward me, but he had no eyes, just shadows where they should have been. Still, I knew him. I don't know how. I just did. He wasn't threatening. He didn't even look at me directly. He just whispered something I couldn't hear through the glass. And then he was gone. Not like he vanished in front of me. Just wasnished. Like he had never been there to begin with. And yet the seat was warm when I opened the door. The air inside the van felt lived in, shifted, changed. And on the dashboard, scratched into the dust with a fingertip. Thank you. That was the first time I cried. Not out of fear, out of grief. Because suddenly I understood what the forest had done, what it had to do. Dante hadn't been taken out of cruelty. He had been kept because no one remembered him. No one had called his name. No one had come back. And now I had. But the story didn't end there, because when I turned the van around, ready to leave that clearing, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw something new. Another word had been added beneath Dante's name on the chimney. Stay, one word. Carved fresh, still wet with sap and soot. The forest wasn't finished with me. It wanted me to stay. And God help me, part of me wanted to. Because in that clearing, with that name, in the silence that no longer felt cruel, I finally felt seen. Not as a stranger, not as prey, but as kin. Like I had been chosen to carry something forward. Like I was now the memory it had once tried to erase. I left anyway. Turned the van around, drove down the path with shaking hands and eyes that refused to blink. But as I passed the tree line and the dirt gave way to gravel, then pavement, then the open road, I felt the forest watching. Not with anger, with longing. Like it knew I couldn't stay, but maybe one day I would return. And for the next 100 miles, I didn't see a single rock stack. The whisper was gone. But the story wasn't, because a week later I was camped in Utah. Dry desert air, high cliffs, no trees in sight. I thought I was free, thought I'd left it behind. And then one night, I opened the van door, and on the ground, waiting in the dust beside my tire, was a single rock, one stone, perfectly round, balanced on its edge, waiting. At first, I didn't touch the stone. I just stood in the desert heat, barefoot in the dry sand, staring down at it. One smooth, rounded rock, balanced unnaturally on its edge, not stacked, not resting. Poised. It shouldn't have been able to stand that way. No wind, no slope, no support. And yet it did. And that told me everything I needed to know. The Smokies hadn't let me go. They had let me out. I picked up the rock eventually, held it in my palm. It was warm, not from the sun, but from something else. It felt like memory, like weight, like a promise or a curse. And when I looked back at the van, my heart stopped. There was something written in the condensation on the rear window, not scratched this time. Breathed. 5 words, "You are the memory now." I dropped the rock, took a step back. My vision blurred, not with fear, but recognition, because I'd felt this before, not just in the mountains, not just in dreams, long before that. As a child, watching shadows dance across my bedroom wall in the dead of night, thinking they whispered. Sitting in church, hearing prayers that felt like repetition, not reverence. Learning my family tree and noticing the names they skipped. Dante. Dante was the skipped name. The silence. The blacked out page. And now the forest had rewritten the story with me in it. I didn't leave Utah the next day. Or the next. I stayed, camped under the stars, spoke to no one. Waited. For what I didn't know. Maybe I was hoping the silence would lift. Maybe I was afraid it would. The van started changing. It had always been mine, my freedom, my shelter, my road home, but it no longer felt like a vehicle. It felt like a vessel, like something was riding inside it with me. The air was different, not heavier, just more aware. The windows fogged in odd patterns. Sometimes I'd wake and find small handprints, not full ones, just the imprint of fingers, as if something had tapped lightly from within the glass. The lights would flicker when I asked aloud, "What do you want?" And return to normal when I asked, "What do you remember?" I started talking to it, to him, to them. I don't know who was listening or if it mattered. But the van always answered, not with words, not directly, but with presence. The kind that shifts your heartbeat, the kind that makes silence feel like a response. And slowly I started to understand what they wanted from me. Not my body, not my soul, my story. They needed someone to carry it forward. To remember the places where people vanished, to keep their names alive, to whisper them back into the trees so the forest wouldn't keep them. It wasn't possession, it was inheritance. And I had accepted it the second I stepped into that clearing, the second I listened. So now, that's what I do. I drive. I don't stay in cities. I don't talk to strangers unless they ask me first. But when I pull into campgrounds, I leave small things behind. Stones, stacks, carved initials in places only the lost would find. And sometimes people come to me, people who've seen things, who've heard things, and I listen, really listen. Because when the forest calls, it's not always with screams. Sometimes it's with silence. And if you've ever sat in your van at night, just you in the woods and a sky too wide to hold your fear, you've felt it, that hush, that waiting, like the land is choosing who gets remembered and who gets taken. I used to be afraid of it, but now I understand. Fear isn't the enemy. Forgetting is. There are names carved into trees that no longer stand. There are stories buried in roots too deep to dig. And if no one speaks them, they vanish. Not just the people, but the echo of them. Their sorrow, their light, their longing. The forest doesn't hate us. It just doesn't want to be forgotten. It wants its ghosts known. So if you ever wake in your camper van somewhere deep in the Smokies, and the crickets go quiet and the trees lean just a little too close, and the whisper creeps in soft and low, don't panic. Listen. Not everything that knocks comes to harm you. Some things knock because they remember your name, and they need to know you remember theirs. So I'll keep driving. The van and I. State to state. Campground to campground. I am the memory now. And if you ever find my Volkswagen parked beside yours in some forgotten clearing in the woods, don't be afraid. Just ask me to tell you a story, and I'll show you the truth that never made it out of the mountains alive. There's a silence in the Appalachian woods that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like something's watching and holding its breath. That's how West Virginia greeted me. Not with the warmth of a sleepy town or the calm of a trickling stream, but with a hush so absolute it pressed against the glass of my Volkswagen like a warning left unspoken. I'd been driving solo for weeks. No plan, just instinct. Just the long pull of the road and the need to get away from everything that was beginning to rot in the life I left behind. My name's Colton, 34. I was born in Missouri, but I didn't stay. I never do. I work remote, code mostly. Enough to keep the tank full and the fridge humming in my VW Westphalia. I don't do campgrounds anymore, not after what happened last spring in the Arizona desert. That's a different kind of story. But it taught me one thing. When you're alone in a place where no one expects you, you hear things clearer. It was the second week of October when I crossed into West Virginia. The kind of autumn that sets the world on fire. Amber leaves, smoky air, a wind that whispers stories through the trees. I thought I knew what solitude felt like, but here, it was different. Solitude here didn't feel like freedom. It felt like something ancient and territorial was waiting for me to make a mistake. I found a primitive spot just outside Seneca Rocks. No markers, no signs. Just a pull-off where the dirt path veered off the main road and wound into a hollow thick with spruce. I didn't see another vehicle for hours. No cell service either. Not even a flicker. That's what I wanted, though. No interruptions, no static, just me in the forest. A reset. The first night was uneventful. Stars overhead like pinpricks in dark silk. The kind of quiet that wraps around you and convinces you the world isn't such a mess after all. I made a small fire, cooked beans, listened to an old radio station on AM until it faded into white noise. And when I shut off the lights and slipped into the sleeping bag, I remember thinking, this is the first good sleep I've had in weeks. But just after midnight, I woke up to tapping. It was soft. Barely there, like the end of a twig against the glass. I sat up slowly, heart already moving faster than it should. The kind of speed that doesn't match the logic in your brain, but matches the instinct you never want to trust. I held my breath and listened. Tap, tap, pause, tap. I eased the curtain back from the front windshield, but there was nothing, just the vague shapes of trees swaying a little in the wind. I waited another 10 minutes. Nothing else. I told myself it was a branch, or maybe a squirrel, or maybe I was just dreaming and halfway still in it. The next morning, the air was crisp, the light filtered green through the canopy, and I laughed at myself over instant coffee. I even said it out loud, like a fool. Get a grip, Colton. I took a hike through the woods, followed the slope down to a creek. There were deer tracks in the mud, a few fresh ones. I felt alone in the best way again. I stayed out most of the day. But when I got back to the van, something made me stop mid-step. There were 3 long scratches on the side of the driver's door. Thin, precise, spaced like fingers. I crouched to inspect. Not deep, not carved in anger, just deliberate. I looked around. Not a soul, not a sound. Just me and the trees, their branches still, no breeze. I should have left then. I know that now. But fear does something strange to the mind when you're far from help. It doesn't scream at you to run. It whispers things like, you're just imagining it. You're tired. It's probably nothing. Denial doesn't feel like weakness out there. It feels like the only way to survive without panicking. That night, I didn't build a fire. I stayed inside, locked the doors, pulled the curtains. I set my hunting knife on the counter, just in case. And I waited. At 2:17 a.m., the tapping came back. But this time, it wasn't from the front windshield. It was from the back. Tap, 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 like fingernails against the rear panel. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just listened, frozen in the sleeping bag, the knife cold in my hand. I waited for it to stop, for something else to follow. But there was nothing. Just the taps. Slow, erratic. Like someone wasn't trying to get in, but to remind me they were out there. And then it stopped. No footsteps, no retreating sounds, just silence so deep it made my ears ring. I must have stayed awake until dawn. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember the feeling when the light finally crept in through the cracked curtain. It was relief so pure it made my hands shake. I got out of the van as the first birds started their morning calls, and I swear to God, every inch of my skin went cold when I saw what was left on the back window. A smudge. A handprint. Too large to be a child's, too wide to be mine. It was oily, like something pressed against the glass and waited there. I wanted to believe it was a joke, that someone had followed me out here, watched me, maybe to scare me. But the problem was there were no tracks, no footprints. The ground around the van was undisturbed, no tire marks, no trails through the brush. It was as if something had come and gone without touching the earth. That day, I didn't hike. I didn't eat. I just sat behind the wheel, gripping it like a lifeline, engine off, music off, windows up, and I watched. Every shift of shadow between the trees felt like a person moving. Every creak in the frame of the van made my breath catch. My body was in that forest, but my mind was already leaving. By dusk, I made a decision. I'd pack up and leave, no matter how dark it got. I couldn't stay another night. I started the van, threw everything into the back haphazardly. I didn't care. I just wanted to be moving. But when I pulled onto the dirt road, something strange happened. The van stalled. Just like that, engine cut, lights dimmed, dead. I turned the key again. Nothing, not even a click. And then I saw it in the side mirror. A shape standing between the trees, maybe 30 feet behind me, still, too still, not moving, not breathing, just watching. At first, I tried to convince myself it was a tree, a trick of the shadows. You know how your mind fills in blanks when you're afraid, how it stitches together something human from the jagged outline of branches and leaves. But no matter how long I stared, it didn't change. It didn't vanish. It didn't blink. It just stood there. And then it shifted, not stepped, not turned, just tilted. Like its head moved slowly, as if curious, as if surprised I'd seen it. I couldn't see a face. It was too far and too dark. But the outline, broad shoulders, two long arms, the odd angle of its posture was wrong. Not just unfamiliar. Wrong in a way that made something deep in my bones scream, leave. But I couldn't leave. The van was dead. I tried the ignition again. This time I heard a click. Just one. A slow grind of resistance that went nowhere. I told myself not to panic. Check the battery. Check the starter. Maybe a fuse. Maybe the cold air did something. Maybe I left something running. I was reaching, and I knew it. But anything was better than sitting still while that shape watched me from the trees. I forced the door open and stepped outside. The air hit me like ice, not the temperature. No, the temperature wasn't that bad. It was the stillness of it. The air was wrong. There was no wind, no bird song, just silence, the kind that makes your skin crawl like it's being touched. I walked around the front, opened the hood. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped the flashlight. When I picked it up, I risked a glance toward the woods. The shape was gone. That should have helped. It didn't, because now I had no idea where it went. The engine looked fine. Battery leads were solid. Nothing smoking, nothing leaking. It just wouldn't turn over. And the deeper fear crept in. The fear that maybe it wasn't a mechanical problem, that maybe I wasn't supposed to leave, that something made sure I'd be stuck. I slammed the hood shut and got back inside, locked every door, pulled the curtains closed. I didn't even try again to start the van. Something in me just gave up, not in surrender, in preparation. Like my mind knew this night was going to be different. Hours passed, and then the tapping started again. But not just from one place, from all sides. Tap, 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 scratch, tap. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, knife in hand, listening to the van being surrounded by the sound. Light, subtle, precise. Like the world outside was full of fingers, dragging along the windows, testing the glass. I whispered to myself, stay calm, don't move, don't respond. And that's when the voice came. Not outside, inside. From the back, it was quiet, a breath almost, a whisper that said, you should not be here. I spun around and flashed the light into the cabin. Empty. Nothing but blankets, gear, and shadows. But I knew what I'd heard. It wasn't imagined. It had weight, tone, a presence that didn't feel like mine. I stayed awake the whole night, holding the knife like a lifeline, light on, eyes darting from window to window. Nothing else came. The tapping stopped after an hour. The silence returned, and somehow, even more than the sound, that silence felt like a threat. At first light, the van started without hesitation, as if nothing had happened, as if the previous night had been some hallucination dreamt behind glass. But I didn't question it. I drove. I didn't stop. Not for breakfast, not for gas, not for anything. I just drove downhill and out of that hollow, watching the rear view like it would betray some final glimpse of what had haunted me. But there was nothing, just the forest, still and silent, vanishing behind me. I should have left the state. I should have kept going. But something made me stop 2 towns down the road in a little place called Hardy. I needed fuel. I needed a moment to breathe. And if I'm being honest, I needed someone to tell me I was crazy. There was a diner. You know the kind. One of those places where the Formica counters are cracked and everyone's plate looks the same. I sat at the bar, ordered black coffee, and tried to act normal. The waitress was maybe in her 50s, kind eyes, raspy voice from too many years of cigarettes and conversation. When she asked where I'd come from, I hesitated. Then I told her, Seneca area, out in the woods near Dry Fork. She froze. Just a flicker, but I saw it. She looked at me differently after that, like she was measuring something about me now, not judging, but weighing. Stay there alone? She asked. Yeah, I nodded. Couple nights. She gave a slow, careful nod of her own, then poured another refill I didn't ask for. You hear anything? My heart kicked once, hard. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just looked at her. That's when she leaned in and said something I'll never forget. My brother used to go hunting out that way, said the forest there listens, not hears, listens, like it remembers who you are when you walk in and decides if it wants to let you leave. I tried to laugh, but it came out thin. She didn't smile. Then she added, most don't go back. She walked away after that, left me alone with my coffee and the rising cold inside my gut. I paid and left. But those words stayed with me. The forest remembers who you are. I kept thinking, what did it remember about me? What did it see when I parked in that clearing, when I laid down in that sleeping bag, when I told myself I was safe? Because something was out there, something old, patient, watching. And for a moment, I think it wanted to keep me. I wish I could say I never went back. I wish I could tell you I had the sense to drive as far from West Virginia as my fuel tank would take me and never look back. But that's not how this story ends. That's not how anyone's story ends when the woods decide you still owe them something. A week passed. I crossed into Pennsylvania, stayed at state parks, clung to civilization like a child clutching a nightlight. But sleep didn't return. The dreams did. And they weren't dreams of what happened. They were dreams of what could have. Dreams where I never left the van. Dreams where the door slowly creaked open in the middle of the night. Dreams where I was dragged, not by hands, but by silence. One morning, just before dawn, I woke up with dirt under my nails and blood on my knuckles. I didn't remember hitting anything, didn't remember getting out of the van, but my boots were wet, and I swear on the last sane part of me, I saw pine needles in my sleeping bag. So I drove back, not to the same spot, not that exact patch of land, but close. I told myself I just wanted answers, that I'd imagined things, that if I went back and faced it, it would lose its power over me. But deep down, there was something else, something darker. I missed it. That feeling of being watched, of being known, of the forest leaning in so close you could feel it breathe against your thoughts. That kind of fear doesn't just scare you. It connects you. It makes you feel something like something out there truly sees you. And when you've lived most of your life invisible, that matters more than you want to admit. I found another pull-off 20 miles southeast of where it happened. Same ridge line, same canopy overhead, the same quiet. This time I brought cameras. Solar-powered trail cams, motion-activated mics, thermal lens, not to prove anything to anyone else, just to prove to myself that something was there. I set up camp just before sunset. The golden light filtered through the trees like it had been doing so for centuries, undisturbed. The air was thick with the smell of earth and moss, that faint rot of wet leaves. Familiar, grounding. But by the time the sun vanished, I realized something had changed. The forest no longer felt curious. It felt expectant, like it knew I'd come back. I cooked. I forced myself to eat. I talked out loud, trying to break the silence. But even my own voice felt muted, like it couldn't stretch far beyond the glow of the fire, like the trees were swallowing sound. Around 10 p.m. when the motion lights blinked on, then another, then another. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, sweeping the perimeter. Nothing. No wind. No movement. Just the lights blinking in some invisible rhythm. On, off, pause, on again, like something was circling, testing, measuring. I told myself it could be raccoons, deer, a branch caught in the breeze. But then I heard it, that same tapping, but this time not on the van. This time on the trees themselves, like something was running its fingers across the bark, long strokes, then sharp raps, then stillness. I turned in a full circle, trying to find the source, and then I saw it. Just beyond the last ring of lights, maybe 20 feet out. A face. No, not a face. A mask. Pale, featureless, smooth, like carved bone. It was hovering in the dark, just visible between two trees. No body, no movement, just that blank shape. watching. I didn't move. Couldn't. My body locked up, every muscle pulled tight like a bowstring. Then, slowly, that shape began to back away. Not step, not turn, just recede, like a shadow being pulled backward by some invisible tide. I rushed over, light raised, but there was nothing. No figure, no prints, just a strange, acrid smell in the air, like burnt hair and old wood. I stayed awake all night again, camera feeds rolling on my laptop, fingers twitching near the knife I never actually used. The taps didn't return. Neither did the mask. But the silence that followed was worse, because it felt satisfied, like something had taken its measure of me and approved. When morning came, I checked the footage. There was movement. Lots of it, shifting shadows, glitches in the thermal, sudden drops in temperature, but no shapes, no faces, except for one frame. 3:14 a.m. on the far right camera for exactly half a second. A silhouette standing just the edge of the tree line, too tall, arms hanging too low, no visible features. Just there, and in its hand, barely visible against the brush, something metallic. Something that looked an awful lot like a knife. My knife. I still had mine in the van. But this looked exactly like it. I packed up right then. I didn't care about the gear. Left 2 cameras behind. Left my tarp, my tools, even the cooler. I drove like something was chasing me and didn't stop until I saw other people. Until I was back under cell towers and gas stations and asphalt. And you know what? Even now, even in the safety of a motel room hundreds of miles away, I still don't feel alone. Because something came back with me. Not physically. Not some stowaway hiding in the van, but a feeling, a presence, a knowing. It's in the corners of mirrors when I look too long, in the flicker of lights that shouldn't flicker, in the taps that sometimes come from inside the wall at night. I learned something in those woods, something no camera can capture, something no story can properly hold. That fear isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's patient, and sometimes it follows you home. I stopped camping after that, for a while, sold the trail cams, let the van sit under a carport in Virginia, dust collecting on its windshield like time was trying to bury the memories. I stayed in motels, cheap rentals, anywhere with 4 walls and at least 2 locks on the door. I told myself I'd seen too much, that I needed rest, that I needed normal. But there's no going back to normal when you've seen something that doesn't play by the same rules, something that doesn't belong in daylight, yet follows you through it anyway. I tried to tell people. A cousin in Kentucky who used to camp with me when we were kids, a guy I used to work with in Chattanooga. They all gave me the same look, polite concern, the kind that dances between he's not okay and don't spook him further. But no one really listened. No one believed that a place could hold on to you, that it could stretch out like a shadow, cross miles, sneak between the folds of a sleeping bag, or crawl in through your dreams. Until I met Martha. She was parked 2 spots down in a rest area near the Blue Ridge Parkway. It was one of those chance encounters that didn't feel like chance. Her Volkswagen was the same make as mine. Older, rust blooming along the rear wheel well, solar panels bolted to the roof with mismatched brackets. We talked over coffee, just small things. Routes, fuel prices, which parts of the Appalachian Trail had the best overlooks. And then she mentioned West Virginia. The moment she said it, I stopped chewing. Her voice changed too. It dipped, like she just opened a drawer inside herself that hadn't been touched in years. I stayed near a creek once, she said. 5 years ago, middle of nowhere. I was trying to forget someone. Her fingers drummed the table like they were remembering a rhythm only she could hear. There was a knocking, the kind that doesn't stop. She didn't need to say more. I knew. We sat in silence for a long time after that. She told me she'd heard the voice too. That same whisper, not aggressive, not loud, just wrong in how human it tried to sound. She said it came from behind her seat one night, even though every door had been locked. She said she left in the middle of the night and never camped alone again. There was no catharsis in that conversation, no comfort in shared terror, just confirmation, and a deeper truth settled into me like a cold breath in my lungs. It wasn't just me. This thing, Whatever it was still there, still watching, still waiting for someone else to wander in. And I couldn't stop thinking, why me? Why Martha? What was the common thread? It wasn't just solitude. It was something more subtle, something personal. I started journaling, going back through every campsite, every strange encounter, every cold shiver and sleepless night, trying to map the pattern, trying to connect the dots between my life and whatever had rooted itself in that West Virginia forest. And what I found chilled me deeper than anything else. Every time I camped alone, it wasn't just about escape. It was grief, a breakup, a death in the family, a job I'd left after burning too many bridges, always right after something in my life had broken. That was the thread. Grief. The woods didn't pull in just anyone. They pulled in people who were already halfway hollow, people whose hearts were too loud with pain for the forest to ignore. And once it hears you, it remembers. I don't think the forest wants to hurt you, not at first. I think it wants to understand you, to learn your rhythm, your fear, your regret. And if you stay too long, if you let your guard down, it becomes part of you. And you, part of it. It doesn't need to chase you. It just waits for you to come back. Because the deeper truth is, people like me always do, always return to the silence, to the dark, to the tapping that reminds us we're never really alone, even when we want to be. I started driving again after that, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. The van had become something else to me. A vessel, a confession box on wheels. It carried all the ghosts I didn't know how to bury. But this time, I didn't go toward West Virginia. I circled it. I parked in Tennessee, in Ohio, in Western Maryland, places close enough to feel the wind shift, to smell the damp wood smoke that always seemed to drift from that state like a whisper of something ancient. And each time I waited to see if it would come for me, waited to see if it could. And sometimes it did. Not as loud as before, not as direct, but in subtler ways. A fox crossing the road and locking eyes with me for too long. An owl perched in daylight, watching silently from a branch overhead. A dream that ends with a whisper in my ear that always says the same thing. We're still here. Sometimes I wonder if I ever really left that clearing. If the van ever really started that morning. If the man I was before I entered those woods didn't just stay there. And all that left was a version of me. A replica. A shadow shaped like a man, programmed to drive and speak and blend, but always hearing the silence behind everything. Because once that forest touches you, it doesn't take your body. It takes your sense of separation. You no longer watch the trees. You feel them watching you back. You're no longer alone. You're no longer you. You're something in between. And every mile you drive after that is an escape. It's resonance. You're echoing something old, something patient, something that remembers you by name. There are days I'll be in some completely normal place. A truck stop outside Nashville, a laundromat in Wyoming, parked behind a diner somewhere along Route 66, and I'll feel it again. That slow, prickling sense that the air has changed, that the light in the sky has dimmed just slightly, even though the sun hasn't moved. That something ancient and careful has paused just for a second to notice me again. Sometimes I catch my own reflection and don't trust what I see. It's not that I look different. It's that I feel like the reflection is looking at me, not mirroring. I see the same tired eyes, same calloused hands, same faint scar above my eyebrow from when I slipped on a frozen step as a kid. But behind it all is a sliver of otherness. A sense that what returned from West Virginia isn't quite what went in, and I'm not alone in that feeling. There are others. Not many, but enough. I started meeting them more often as the months went by. People who live in vans and Volkswagens, who drift through the back roads of America, chasing some peace they can never quite find. They always recognize the signs in each other. The distant look. The way we double-check locks even in daylight. The way we react when we hear something tap on the roof after midnight. We exchange nods like veterans of a war no one else believes in. One of them was named Jared. I met him in a forest just north of Asheville. He looked young, but his eyes were tired, like they'd been staring through too much night. He asked me right away, "You ever camp near the Monongahela?" The question landed like a punch to the ribs. That's exactly where I had been. He told me his story, his version. It was different, but not really. His began with a woman humming in the woods, soft, sweet, just out of sight. He followed it, couldn't help himself, got lost for 7 hours, even though he was just 50 yards from his van the whole time. When he found his way back, the inside of his Volkswagen smelled like soil. Rich, damp, freshly dug soil. His clothes had mud on them. His boots were wet, but he didn't remember walking through any water. He left the next morning. He said he still hears the humming sometimes when his windows are cracked and the night's just quiet enough. He looked me dead in the eye when he said it. They choose you. And he didn't mean it like a curse. He meant it like a bond, like something had reached across the veil between worlds, touched his shoulder, and marked him with the weight of knowing. And maybe he was right. Maybe we were chosen, but not for anything noble or heroic, not for punishment either. We were chosen because we were willing to go into the silence, willing to be alone long enough for the old things to find us, willing to ignore the noise of the world and finally hear what whispers beneath it. I've had nights, long, restless nights, where I ask myself if I'd do it again. If I could go back in time and change that first decision, skip that pull-off near Seneca, avoid West Virginia entirely, would I? And the answer, though it twists my stomach every time, is no, because something about that place, that experience, rewired me. It cut out the hollow noise of the world and filled it with something real. Something dark, yes, something terrifying, but real. Most people drift through life afraid of shadows they don't understand. Me? I met mine, sat with it, listened, and now every decision I make, every town I pass through, every night I choose to sleep or keep driving, it all hums with that awareness, that presence. It never left me, but it doesn't try to scare me anymore, not the way it used to. Now it watches, and sometimes I think it's waiting for me to come back, not to visit, not to camp, but to stay. There are legends in those mountains. You hear them in bars and old ranger stations, carved into the backs of picnic tables and etched into the graffiti of lookout towers long abandoned. They talk about the hollow ones, the quiet folk, the remembering trees. Names passed down from tongues too afraid to speak them plainly. They say the forest holds memories like a wound that never scabs over. They say if you camp alone long enough in the wrong spot, you stop being a visitor. You become a chapter. And chapters don't get to walk away. They get retold. I've heard stories from locals who refuse to go into certain woods after dark. Hunters who left game behind because they saw a man watching them through a mask of bark. Campers who woke up with their shoes neatly placed outside, even though they never took them off. And sometimes people just disappear. No sign, no struggle, just gone. Like the forest decided it was time to reclaim them, like it turned the page. That's why I don't camp deep anymore. I stay near roads, near voices, because I know the further in I go, the harder it will be to come back out. And yet, there's a pull. Every mile that separates me from West Virginia feels like resistance against a current I can't see, a tide rising beneath my thoughts, whispering. Not in words, in memories. Memories I don't remember making, memories of standing barefoot in cold moss, of whispering back at the trees, of carving something into a trunk and watching it bleed sap that smelled like copper. And if you ask me what scares me most now, it's not the dark, not the tapping, not even the voice that once spoke from the back of my van. It's the thought that maybe I was never alone at all. That maybe, from the moment I parked in that hollow, from the moment I stepped into that silence, something else stepped into me. And it never left. It just waits. Patiently, lovingly. Like the forest itself has a hand pressed gently against my back, guiding me slowly, softly toward the moment I finally stop driving and go home. Sometimes I wonder if I'm already headed back. If every road I take, no matter how winding, how spontaneous, somehow bends gently, almost imperceptibly toward West Virginia, not because I want to return, not because I'm drawn by adventure or curiosity, but because that's how stories end. Not with a scream, not even with silence, but with a slow, inevitable circle. A return to the place where something inside you broke just enough for the old world to find its way in. You see, people think horror lives in the moment of panic, the scream, the chase, the thing in the dark. But that's not where true fear lives. True fear is quiet. It's in the choice to keep going when something inside you whispers that you should stop. It's in the sound of your own breath when you're not sure if it's only yours. It's in that feeling of being known by something you'll never understand. I've come to accept that I'm part of that place now. That even when I'm hundreds of miles away, even when I'm laughing with strangers or sipping cheap coffee in a sunlit parking lot, part of me is still in those woods. Still walking, still listening, still waiting for a sound that doesn't belong. There are things I never told anyone, like the night I passed through Missouri and found a pine cone resting on my dashboard when I came back from the gas station. I hadn't parked near any trees. The van was locked, and yet there it was, small, unopened, fresh, or the dream I had in a motel outside Pittsburgh where I was lying in my van under the canopy and something knelt beside me and whispered, "You're almost ready." I didn't sleep for days after that one, but more than the fear, more than the waking dread, what lingers is the strange calm that follows, the acceptance. As if the forest doesn't need to chase me anymore, as if it's already inside me, shaping me from within, like roots growing in slow silence, cracking the foundation of who I used to be. I still see people on the road, other Volkswagen travelers, dreamers chasing freedom, nomads who think the open land will heal what the cities broke. And I want to warn them. Sometimes I do, but mostly I don't. Because there's something sacred in finding it out for yourself. Something in the solitude that opens a door no one else can touch. And once that door opens, once you hear that first whisper in the trees, it's already too late. You're already in the story, already a thread in something older than maps, deeper than roads. You're a voice echoing back to the forest. And one day, when you're ready, it answers. You might ask me what that means. Ready. Ready for what? But that's the thing. You don't know until it happens. It doesn't come with a sign or a scream or a climax. It comes in the stillness, in the moment when the van is parked and the fire's burned down and the last song on the radio fades into static and you feel it. That presence, that softness in the dark, like something is cradling your mind. Not threatening, not aggressive, just there. I felt it more lately. Not in fear, but in surrender. I used to resist it, used to grip the wheel so hard my hands went numb, used to sleep with the knife under my pillow, but now I leave the curtains open. Now I let the night look in. Now I listen. And sometimes I speak back. Just in a few words, not prayers, not pleas, just acknowledgments. I'm still here, I'll say. I haven't forgotten. Because I haven't. How could I? The forest marked me, not with scars, not with memories, but with awareness. I see the world differently now. I see what lies beneath it. And I know when my time comes, when the roads no longer call and the wheels finally still, I won't die in a hospital bed or in some city street. I'll go quietly, alone, back into that stretch of woods in West Virginia, back to the hollow where the trees remember. I'll park my Volkswagen. I'll turn off the engine. I'll step out, barefoot in the moss, and walk. No flashlight, no gear, no fear, just silence, just return. And when I reach that spot, the one I've never quite forgotten, I'll sit and I'll wait. Not for a thing to happen, but for something to end. Because this story was never mine. It was ours. The forest and me. A bond sealed in tapping fingers, breath on glass, dreams whispered through leaves. And when it finally takes me, it won't feel like death. It'll feel like a homecoming, like the final page turning itself, and the quiet closing of a book that no one else will ever read.